My name is Brandy. I'm 33 years old, and the moment my niece repeated my mother's words at the Christmas table, I knew my family was never going to change. You would think that after 5 years, people would stop acting like your adopted child is a guest in their own family. 5 Christmases, 5 birthdays, 5 summers of polite smiles that never quite reach the eyes, the careful pauses in conversation, the way people spoke around him, not to him, like he couldn't understand. My son is 5. He's bright. He notices everything. And for years, I tried to bridge the gap between him and the people I once believed were my family. We arrived at my parents' house in Ohio the day before Christmas. I had gifts for everyone, carefully wrapped, each one topped with a drawing my son made himself. He was excited, bouncing on his heels, asking if Grandma would like the picture he made just for her. I told him she would. I should have known better. My mom greeted us with a brief side hug, then crouched down in front of my son and asked, "Do you remember me?" He nodded politely and handed her the drawing. She smiled the way someone smiles when a stranger on the subway hands them something they don't want but don't know how to refuse. My dad barely acknowledged him at all, just a distracted glance and a grunt before shaking my husband Derek's hand. Christmas morning started off deceptively normal. My son played quietly on the carpet with a toy car, humming to himself. I helped in the kitchen, trying to ignore the familiar tightness in my chest. Then I felt it, that sudden silence that makes your stomach drop because you know something has gone wrong. I walked into the living room and saw my niece sitting upright on the couch, glittery headband, slightly crooked, wearing the same smug expression she always gets from her mother. She looked directly at my son and said clear as day, "Grandma told me you're not her real grandson." He didn't cry. He didn't ask questions. He just stopped chewing and lowered his plate, staring at the floor like he was trying to disappear. I froze. The worst part wasn't what was said. It was what didn't happen afterward. My sister giggled, actually giggled, like it was a joke she expected someone else to join in on. No one corrected her. Not my brother-in-law, not my father, not even my mother. She just lifted her teacup and took a sip like she hadn't heard a thing. Derek stood up slowly. I knew he was about to speak, and I shook my head. I didn't want my son's memory of that moment to be a shouting match. I wanted him to forget it, if that was even possible. Derek paused, then calmly tapped his glass once and said, "At least now we know who the smallest person at this table really is." The room went dead silent. We left without explanation. I packed our gifts back into the car while my sister asked if we were seriously leaving already. I didn't answer. My son fell asleep before we left the neighborhood. That night, after putting him to bed, Derek and I sat on the couch without talking for a long time. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. No apology, no acknowledgement, just one message. "Did you send the family bonus this year?" I stared at it, then typed my reply. "Oh, it was just not to you." That was the night everything finally changed. The thing about cutting a safety net is that the people standing on it never feel the fall right away. For the first few days after Christmas, nothing happened. No angry calls, no frantic messages. My parents went on like everything was normal, probably assuming that whatever mood I was in would pass the way it always had before. They were used to me smoothing things over, swallowing discomfort, pretending that love meant endurance. They didn't know yet that something had shifted for good. Every year since Derek's business took off, we'd sent a little something to the family. Sometimes it was a gift card. One year we paid for my parents' trip to Florida. Another year, we quietly covered a repair bill they were stressing over. We never announced it. We never wanted praise. It just felt like what families did. Help each other out. Make life a little easier. Somewhere along the way, help turned into expectation. 3 days after we got home, my mom called from the pharmacy. Her voice was clipped, tight, the way it gets when she's trying to sound polite in public but is seething underneath. She said her card had been declined. Asked if Derek had changed something. She didn't ask if everything was okay. She didn't ask why. She assumed it was a mistake that needed fixing. I told her the card wasn't active anymore, that we weren't covering expenses this year. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine her standing at the counter, people waiting behind her. Then she said, "I can't believe you'd let a man come between you and your own family," and hung up. The next morning, my dad sent an email. He always wrote emails like he was giving a presentation, bullet points and all, as if formatting could make his words reasonable. He said I was choosing someone else's child over my own blood. He said Derek was isolating me. He reminded me of everything they'd done for me growing up, as if that somehow erased what they were doing now. At the bottom, he wrote, "When that man leaves you, and he will, don't come running back." I read it twice, then deleted it. Derek didn't say anything until I told him. Then he looked at me and said, "They're not mad because we stopped helping. They're mad because they thought we never would." That's when the calls started coming from other directions. My brother rang late one night, his voice tense in a way I'd never heard before. He said Mom and Dad were in trouble. Their second mortgage was months behind. They'd tried to refinance, but with their credit, no bank would touch them. Now they were asking him for money. He told them no. Said he wasn't stupid enough to keep setting himself on fire so they could stay warm. I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, just done. A few days later, my mom messaged me on Facebook instead of calling, as if distance would make her words land softer. She said they were struggling, that they weren't asking for much, that I should think about what family really means. Derek didn't comment when I showed him. He just kept stirring my son's hot cocoa, steam fogging up his glasses. Later that night, he told me something I hadn't known. For almost a year, he'd been quietly covering their second mortgage payments. He'd never told me because he didn't want me to feel pressured. "I thought I was buying you peace," he said. "But I'm not buying silence anymore." January came and stripped away whatever pride my parents had left. The holidays were over. The bills came in. The silence they used as punishment turned into something sharper, more desperate. My brother texted me one night with no greeting, just a warning. He said Mom and Dad were talking to someone who helped when banks said no. High interest, no patience, the kind of loan that ruins people. He said he wasn't asking me to help. He just didn't want me blindsided if things got ugly. I sat on the couch staring at my phone while my son built a tower out of blocks on the rug, knocking it over and laughing like it was the best joke in the world. Derek was in the kitchen making dinner, humming under his breath like everything was normal. And in that moment, I realized how separate our lives had become from theirs. 2 different worlds, 2 different realities. A few days later, my mom called again. This time she sounded tired. No sarcasm, no lecture. She said things weren't working out the way they'd planned. She said she missed me, missed our talks, missed how holidays used to be. She never mentioned my son, not once. I told her I had to go, that he needed me, and I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, Derek looked at me and said, "They're testing the door." And I knew he was right. 3 days after my mother's last call, the testing stopped being subtle. Derek came home earlier than usual, dropped his bag by the door, and went straight to the sink for a glass of water. He drank it like someone trying to ground themselves, then said, almost casually, "Your dad came by my office today." I felt the air leave my lungs. Derek doesn't work somewhere you can just wander into. You have to ask. You have to wait. You have to be let in. Which meant my father had shown up, asked for him by name, and sat there until someone opened the door. He didn't ask about me. He told Derek he was worried about me, said I wasn't acting like myself lately, said I seemed isolated. He suggested therapy, asked if Derek thought counseling might help me reconnect with my family. He framed it gently, like concern, but the implication was sharp. If I wouldn't bend, maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was unstable. Derek told him very little. He nodded, listened, and walked him out. Then Derek handed me his phone. There was an email, no name attached, just an address I didn't recognize. The attachment was a PDF, bank statements, overdue notices, frozen accounts, a foreclosure warning on the second mortgage. At the bottom, a single sentence. "We're not asking for handouts, just guidance. Please don't let her make a decision that hurts everyone." They went around me. They tried to recruit my husband. They tried to turn my boundary into a liability. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the bin with my son's things. The baby blanket he came home in. The zoo photo from the day he called me Mom by accident, and then smiled like he'd discovered a secret. Crayon drawings folded until the paper went soft. I sat on the floor and breathed until the shaking passed. Family doesn't break into your life through back doors when the money dries up. Family protects the child sleeping down the hall. The next morning, I wrote them an email. Short, direct, no explanations. I told them we would not be helping financially. I told them they were not to contact Derek again, directly or indirectly. I told them any further attempts to undermine me would be documented and addressed formally. I ended with one line: "You made your choice at the table." There was no reply. A week later, my mother sent a photo instead. She and my father standing outside a small brick church, hands clasped, faces solemn, like they were posing for a brochure. The caption read, "We've started counseling. We're trying. Please don't give up on us." I didn't respond. I stared at that picture in the grocery line, in the carpool lane, late at night when the house was quiet. I couldn't tell if it was change or a costume. Derek noticed before I admitted it. He said I'd been off since the photo arrived. I told him the truth, that I didn't know how to feel, that I kept thinking about 10 years from now, about my son asking why he didn't know his grandparents, about not having a clean answer. Derek didn't argue. He asked one question: "Do you think they've earned another chance?" 2 days later, a longer message arrived. Polished, careful. They wrote about counseling forcing uncomfortable conversations, about selling the second car, cutting up credit cards, meeting with a debt counselor. My mother mentioned taking a part-time job. They named my son by name and wrote a sentence that stopped me cold. "We saw him as a symbol of your choices, not as a person. That's on us, not him." It was the first time they named the harm without deflecting. I told Derek I was thinking about a short meeting. Neutral place, public, no child, just to see. He listened, then said quietly, "They didn't just say terrible things. They tried to unmake you. You can forgive that if you want. He won't pay for it." We waited. A week passed. Then another. No messages, no pressure. Then an envelope appeared in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photo of a small apartment with secondhand furniture and boxes stacked against the wall. A handwritten note said they'd sold the house and moved. No expectations. Just wanted me to know they were starting over. I left the note on the counter between my son's drawings and the grocery list. Derek didn't comment. On the third morning, I wrote back. I told them I got the photo, that I respected the steps they were taking, and that we were not ready to include them in our son's life, not now, maybe one day. If the work was real, it would continue without us watching. I pressed send and waited. They didn't reply. The silence that followed felt different from all the others. It wasn't angry or performative. It didn't come wrapped in guilt or threats. It just existed, wide and unfamiliar. And for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to fill it. Weeks passed, then a month. Life settled into a rhythm that didn't include them, and I realized how much of my energy I had spent anticipating their reactions instead of living my own days. Mornings became about backpacks and mismatched socks and reminding my son where he left his favorite sweater. Afternoons were homework at the kitchen table and Derek cooking dinner while humming softly to himself. Evenings were stories before bed, his small hand tucked into mine, his breathing slowing as he drifted off. There was no tension in those moments, no sense of waiting for something to go wrong. It felt earned, like peace you don't notice until you've lived without it for too long. Then, just as I started to trust that quiet, it cracked. It began with a message from a number I didn't recognize, friendly, casual, signed with a first name I vaguely remembered from my mother's social circle. She said she was part of my mom's church group and that my mother had mentioned I might want to reconnect sometime. "No pressure," she wrote. "Just thought she'd reach out." I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. I hadn't responded to my parents in months. I hadn't mentioned church or reconnecting or anything at all, and yet here was someone else carrying their message for them. The next day, another text came in. This one from a youth coordinator at the same church, inviting my son to weekend activities. She said my mother thought he might enjoy making friends his age. My chest tightened. I hadn't shared his name with anyone. I hadn't asked for outreach. And suddenly strangers were using him as a bridge back to me. I called the church that afternoon. I kept my voice calm, polite. I thanked them for the invitation and declined. Then I asked a simple question. Had my mother given them my contact information? There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Yes, she had. The coordinator apologized, said she thought I was open to reconnecting and just needed encouragement. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling the familiar mix of anger and clarity rise in my chest. That night, I told Derek everything. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to soften it. When I finished, he said, "That wasn't a mistake. That was strategy. And I knew he was right. They hadn't changed. They had adapted. When direct access was denied, they found another door, wrapped control in kindness, used community and faith to make it look harmless. I wrote one final email that night. Not long, not emotional. I told my mother I knew what she'd done, that involving third parties, especially in spaces we didn't share, was a violation of the boundary I'd set, that it showed me the difference between growth and performance. I asked for space. Then I made it unmistakably clear. No more contact. Not through friends, not through church, not through anyone. I ended it with one sentence. This is no longer a conversation. She didn't reply. I blocked her number. Derek blocked it too. The house went quiet again, but this time it felt settled, not suspended. Days passed without incident. Then weeks. My son stopped asking about grandparents entirely. He stopped checking my face after drawing pictures or making cards, stopped asking who they were for. He just created, freely, without expectation. Spring arrived slowly. We spent weekends at the park, watching him race other kids across the grass, his laughter bright and unburdened. One afternoon, he asked me if families could be small. I told him yes, they could be exactly the size they needed to be. He smiled and said he liked ours. I realized then that this wasn't loss, it was protection. And I didn't owe anyone an explanation for that. By the time summer crept in, the distance had done what confrontation never could. It showed me who we were without them, not as an act of rebellion or punishment, but as a quiet fact. Our days filled up with ordinary things that felt extraordinary only because no one was criticizing them. Derek took my son fishing on Saturday mornings. I learned which snacks disappeared fastest from the pantry and which stories he liked to hear twice before bed. I stopped bracing for the phone to ring. The house felt lighter, like a window had been cracked open and something stale finally drifted out. I heard about my parents through other people, the way news travels when it's not meant for you. A cousin mentioned they were struggling in the apartment, downsizing further than planned. Someone else said my mom complained that people at church didn't understand the situation. My sister posted photos online, smiling wide with her kids and my parents, captions that talked about blessings and togetherness without naming anyone missing. I didn't comment. I didn't scroll long enough to feel anything at all. The first direct contact came not from my parents, but from my father's email, weeks after the church incident. The subject line was neutral, businesslike. Checking in. Inside, he wrote that they hoped we were well, that they respected my need for space, that they were still doing counseling. Then, halfway through, the tone shifted. He asked if we were still considering investing in another property and whether there might be a way to structure something that could help them through a rough patch. No apology, no acknowledgement of boundaries, just a careful return to transaction, like nothing had happened. I stared at the screen for a long time, the familiar urge to explain rising in my throat, to remind him of the house, the broken toy, the envelope of cash, the bracelet my son made me that disappeared into my mother's coat pocket. Then I closed the laptop. Some arguments end not with words, but with refusal. I didn't respond. A few days later, my sister tried. She sent a text that started with, "Look, everyone's hurting," and ended with, "Can't you just be the bigger person?" I deleted it without answering. I'd spent years being bigger, quieter, more accommodating. All it ever bought me was permission for them to keep going. The moment that finally sealed it came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. My son brought home a worksheet from school, a simple assignment titled, "My Family." He sat at the table with his crayons and filled in the boxes. My name, Derek's, our dogs, a best friend from class. When I asked if he wanted to add anyone else, he shook his head. "That's everyone," he said, and went back to coloring. There was no confusion in his voice, no sadness, just certainty. That night, Derek asked me if I was okay. I told him I was better than okay. I told him I felt finished. Not angry, not grieving, finished. The kind of finished that doesn't need closure because it has clarity. We talked about the future instead, about trips we wanted to take, about the mountain place we'd been eyeing, about how to make holidays ours, without rehearsals or expectations. I thought about my parents once, late that night, not with longing, but with distance. I hoped they kept going to counseling. I hoped they learned something real, and I knew, with a steadiness that surprised me, that it didn't require my presence to be true. Protecting my son wasn't a reaction anymore. It was our life. The final shift didn't come with a confrontation or a message that tied everything together. It came quietly, the way seasons change when you're not paying attention to the calendar. One day I realized I hadn't checked my blocked messages in weeks. Another day I noticed that the idea of running into them didn't tighten my chest anymore. The absence stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like space. Autumn arrived with cooler mornings and a different rhythm. My son started waking up earlier, excited for school, talking about a science project and a class pet he wanted to name. Derek adjusted his schedule so he could do drop-offs twice a week. We found ourselves planning weekends without thinking about who might be offended. We hosted friends for dinner and laughed loudly without scanning the room for disapproval. We built traditions that didn't require permission. There were moments when memory tried to intrude. A holiday display at the store, a church parking lot we passed on the way to the park. I let those moments pass without attaching meaning to them. I had learned the difference between remembering and reopening. One honors what happened, the other hands it power again. My sister tried once more, a brief text that said she missed me and hoped we could talk. It didn't mention my son. It didn't acknowledge anything that had happened. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to explain. Silence, I had learned, can be an answer without being a punishment. We took that mountain trip we'd talked about, a small place with tall trees and a porch that caught the afternoon light just right. My son ran along the trail pointing out birds and rocks like he was discovering the world for the first time. At night, we sat by the fire and told stories, the kind that grow legs and wander off into laughter. No one asked who wasn't there. No one needed to. On the last morning, he drew us a picture. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. He added stars to the sky even though it was daylight. When I asked him why, he said because he wanted it to look happy all the time. I taped it to the fridge when we got home, right where I could see it every day. I used to think family was something you endured, something you held together even when it cut you. I don't believe that anymore. Family is who protects your child's sense of belonging. Family is who doesn't ask them to earn love with silence. Family is the place where doors don't open without permission and apologies don't arrive only when leverage fails. I don't know what my parents believe now. I don't know if counseling changed them or if it simply taught them new language. I don't need to know. The truth is, I stopped needing them to become different in order for my life to be whole. That need was the last thread, and letting it go felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. We didn't reconcile. We didn't stage a reunion. We chose something quieter and stronger. We chose a home where my son never has to wonder if he belongs. We chose a life where love isn't conditional and respect isn't negotiated. And every morning when he runs into the kitchen asking for pancakes shaped like hearts, I know we chose right.